Hello and welcome back. This is Penny Sansevieri with my awesome co-host, Ms. Amy Cornell, and this is the Book Marketing Tips and Author Success Podcast. Amy, how are you doing?
Very good, thank you.
I'm really excited in particular about today's show because we are going to talk about Bookstagrammers, which it's kind of interesting how weirdly mysterious Bookstagrammers are. Right? I mean, don't you agree?
Yes, 100%.
Because I was having this, so I was part of this discussion. It's a book marketing group, and I was reading some of the discussions, and somebody asked about a particular book marketing service where it was $70 to do a Bookstagram tour, and her question was, is this a good idea? What's a Bookstagrammer tour? And it was interesting the responses that she got. Because for $70, you think, oh, well, what the heck? I can spend $70 on something and see what happens. But, $70 and $70 and $70, it starts to add up if you're not spending it in the right way. So the conversation got, as we started to dig into the conversation in this group, it turned into, well, what do you really expect from a Bookstagram tour? Because it's one thing to say, I'm going to do a Bookstagram tour and this is awesome, but it's a whole different thing to say, what the heck is a Bookstagram tour? I mean, because you and I've had this discussion several years back when these first started. I ran to Amy. Sometimes we sit around and talk about ideas, and we call them rabbits because we come up with all these ideas for new things to offer our authors. And I said, oh, Amy, let's do Bookstagram tours. And then we started to research it. And it was really this, not to keep using the rabbit analogy, but it was really this weird rabbit hole of what the heck is a Bookstagram tour? I mean, do you find that too, Amy?
No, it was true because it seemed like we have to do this because it's this new thing and it was popping up everywhere and you were seeing, hashtag Bookstagram everywhere. We're like, okay, we do book marketing. We should figure out some way to offer this. But then, yeah, you're totally right. When we started digging into it, it was really an entirely different concept than we thought. And so that's why it was really interesting when you said this author wanted to do a Bookstagram tour. My ears perked up because I love Instagram for authors because I think it's a really user-friendly social media to get involved in. Yeah. I think in regards to the time you have to put in, especially if you're a naturally creative person, I think it just fits in really well with a lot of people's personalities if you're already an author in writing. But it is, social media is just one of those really tricky elements of your platform and brand. And it can be really hard to know what's really moving the needle and kind of pushing people to actually buy your book. Because a lot of hard work goes in and it all matters, but it's not so easy to say like, oh, this worked, I made money off this. And that's the first thing I think of, when you say a Bookstagram tour. It's like, that sounds great, but, what happens? Like, do you actually make any money off of this? Like, what's the goal?
Right, exactly. And that's one of the things that I find with Bookstagrammers that's so misunderstood. Like, you can't do, so the term tour to me is a little bit misleading, right? Because you can't do a Bookstagram tour per se, but what you can do is you can find book lovers on Instagram who have big followings, because the Bookstagram hashtag has been diluted. So the Bookstagram hashtag, for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, just to give you a little bit of backstory, Reese Witherspoon sort of started this, right? Because she's on Instagram talking about books for her book club. And I don't know whether she started the Bookstagram hashtag, but she certainly made it popular. And so, the idea of using the hashtag is actually kind of in reverse, because what you really want to do is you want to find, as I said, book lovers who are on Instagram who have big followings, because the hashtag has really been diluted.
Right. Yeah, I 100% agree. Because it really started in Reese. That's a great example for how it started, because being a Bookstagrammer was definitely like a status symbol. Like, if you were a Bookstagrammer, the whole theory is that you followed a very specific approach to how you run your account and the kind of content you're putting up there. But then it started to get used by people that just love books in general.
Right.
And authors were throwing it on there, and the concept behind it and the content that was posted with the Bookstagram hashtag got really muddied.
Yeah, exactly. Because the accounts, not the hashtag, is what's really going to get you attention. And that's where I think that sort of the disconnect is. And the other piece of it too is something that we haven't addressed is the bigger books. So any of the bigger book accounts, and I would say, you know, kind of the origin stories of Bookstagrammers, those people, a lot of times they'll charge for a feature. So if you're sending your book to them, they're going to say, well, this is, you know, $5,000 or 30,000, depending on how many followers they have, et cetera. And, you know, some people might do that. We've never encountered that per se, just because that's not necessarily a lot of the really, really big Bookstagrammers. First off, I think they're, you know, the accounts that are tethered to big numbers, they tend to be booked up months and months, and sometimes even, you know, even a year or more in advance, depending on how early that they're gotten to. So it's really about looking, finding the account. And the other piece of it that I've discovered as I've started to research bloggers for pitching to pitch our authors to, because we're always and continually doing new research to add to or update our blogger list, is that a lot of these book bloggers have robust Instagram accounts. And you could say that they're Bookstagrammers, maybe not in the traditional sense, but they have really active Instagram accounts, which is kind of a bonus. So if you get picked up by, you know, XYZ blogger, they're going to put you on Goodreads. They're going to put your review on Goodreads. They might review it on Amazon, but they also have a big tribe of people who follow them on Instagram, and they're sharing it there.
Yeah, a Bookstagrammer, you know, that's really, and that's why, you know, it makes total sense that it's so closely knit with book bloggers, you know, because a Bookstagrammer is really like fiercely dedicated to showcasing books.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a visual way for them to make book recommendations. And it really is kind of the book blogger version of social media, if there is going to be one. So if the person is a Bookstagrammer and really, you know, going to be a thought leader and somebody that, you know, if you get your book on their account, you're probably going to make some headway. You know, that person is really dedicated to showcasing books. And this is not going to be somebody that has a book in one post and then maybe a photo of their dinner and then their dog doing something cute. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, it doesn't mean that that person can't be a book thought leader to some degree. But again, that's where, you know, how we start off the show, where that fine line is between, you know, a Bookstagrammer. Like if that's who you're going after, there are kind of telltale signs of whether or not that is what that account is dedicated to.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's another example. So I was listening to I was listening to some audio from last year's RWA writers conference, and one of the authors there, she's a big best-selling author, but when she started out, she was really confused about how to use social media. I mean, and this is sort of a reoccurring question for a lot of authors. And so she decided to take pretty pictures of books that she loved, that she was reading. And she has this great like library area. And so that's all she did, is she took really pretty pictures of books that she loved. And in a very sort of organic way, she became a Bookstagrammer, right? But so she's an author. She doesn't review books. She doesn't have but she takes pictures of books that she loves, and her entire Instagram account, she weaves some of her own stuff in there, but her entire Instagram account is all books. Like that's her entire thing. And that's and it's very basic. It's a beautiful account, but that's exactly what a Bookstagrammer does. So there is no, as Amy said, there's no crossover with,
Right.
you know, now I'm going to put up a picture of, you know, now I'm going to put a picture of my dog and my dinner, et cetera. So let's break down a little bit how to reach, let's go back first and talk about the author who started this whole conversation, which I was glad that she did, about the $70 Bookstagram tour, right? And what I suspect that was, and she didn't tell me who it was or, whatever, and I know there's a lot of them out there, it's probably like they're probably going to tour you with the hashtag. So in other words, they probably have an Instagram account and they're sharing your book, or they're sharing excerpts, or maybe they're sharing images, and they're using the Bookstagram hashtag, right? They're probably not necessarily pitching bloggers, but they're really just using the hashtag. And that doesn't get, I mean, Amy, and by full disclosure, Amy manages our company's social media. Just using that hashtag doesn't really get you much bounce, right?
No, and that's, where when we were talking about how it got kind of muddied, because people that are searching for that hashtag, we can kind of presume, just based on how and why it started, is that they are looking for book recommendations in the genre or genres they're interested in. I mean, it really is, again, the Bookstagrammer thing is really a very visual way for someone to make recommendations for books. And just putting the hashtag on all of your posts because you happen to be an author, whether it's your personal account or author account or whatever, people are going to recognize very quickly that you are not giving them what they're looking for.
Yeah.
And you have to be really careful with misusing hashtags, because not only are they instantly going to say, well, this is not what I'm looking for. I search Bookstagrammer, this doesn't make sense. You're also hurting your chances of getting a follow anyway, because maybe they'll see that, well, okay, well, this is a romance author though, and their covers look good. Maybe I'll follow her anyway and kind of come back to this later. But, you don't want to be one of those people that's kind of pulling a bait and switch on them. So you have to be really careful when you use hashtags like this, that you really understand what you're doing and that you're being authentic and staying true to what the hashtag is. Otherwise, you risk really turning people off and misrepresenting your brand.
Yeah, that's that's really good. And that's something that we've referred to as hashtag hijacking. So you want to be really careful about, there's nothing wrong with using the hashtag if it's appropriate to what the discussion around it. Because you won't build your followers, you certainly won't build any love for your book. So just being careful about, and I would, in terms of like, if you really are set on doing some kind of a tour, doing some kind of a Bookstagram tour, spend a little bit of time and see what people are sharing under the Bookstagrammer hashtag. You're going to be surprised, because when Amy and I were researching this, that's what we did. Because like I said, it sounded really super exciting at first, and it's not at all to discourage you, because I definitely think that there is some merit to it. But just be careful that you're not dipping, like you're not trying to, or as we often say, not trying to sell a puppy to a cat person, right? You want to be sure that you're staying in line with what the Bookstagrammer community sort of expects of this. So let's break this down, because I think that at the end of the day, so we've talked a little bit about kind of the rules around Bookstagrammers and how to stay kind of in line with what their expectations are. So let's talk a little bit more about how to build towards this potentially, what some of these accounts and what some of these bloggers might be looking for, how to build your own presence on Instagram. And you've done that for our account, certainly. And I dip my toe in there and get onto the account, obviously, too. But you've done a really great job of staying focused on our brand for building our Instagram presence.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Penny, because you can't just jump into it and start and just play offense. Let's put it that way.
Right.
You have to work on your defense a little bit, and that's focusing on your own account. And that goes back to what we said earlier. The Bookstagram thing, it's not just a hashtag. It's how your account is managed. It's the content you put on there. And this doesn't mean that because you've been doing something else up until now, you're screwed.
No, not at all.
You know what I mean? You really can take a more Bookstagrammer type focus for your account, and that may be something you really want to look into, especially if you've been floundering to date, so to speak, with not really knowing what to do, on Instagram. Like, how do I use this? Like, I'm not really sure what's going on. It's not working. So maybe check out some Bookstagrammers, and maybe that would be a great outlet for you. But yeah, you definitely want to focus on your own brand. You know, it's so funny. People use the word vibe, but truly, like on social media, you put out a vibe, you
Yeah.
know, and
Yeah.
a lot of Instagrammers, as Penny mentioned, their accounts are gorgeous. They're really good at using similar color palettes, or they use the same type of filter on all their images. So as soon as you get to their account, you go, whoa, this all makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
It's true. And then,
Yeah.
you know, when you start searching hashtags, and what's really great about Instagram, is I will say in my experience, is that the recommendations that they make once you start following people, you know, that really fit into the niche that you want to find, their recommendations for other accounts to follow is usually really spot on. So, you know, start following, you know, search for Bookstagrammers. You will know, I'm telling you, you will know when you find those accounts. Start following some of those, follow the recommendations, and then you really got to get on there and just be a user. You know, you got to start liking posts, commenting on posts, you know, tagging people if you share any of their thoughts or ideas. You know, giving them credit is a really great way to organically kind of boost your following. And you really just have to get on there and kind of be a user, you know, and kind of
Yeah.
always be wearing your business person hat and always having an ulterior motive. Like, get on there and use it as a book lover, you know, and start kind of embodying what a bookstagrammer is. And once your account starts representing that, reaching out to them and connecting with them is going to be a lot easier.
Right, right, exactly. And I think that's the other piece of it. And, you know, while we were chatting, I pulled up the Bookstagrammer hashtag on Instagram. And you're right. There is a particular sort of look to some of these bigger accounts. And they have that, they have that really, really cool feel to it. And I think that don't just necessarily copy or feel like you have to look exactly like some of these bookstagrammers that's out there. Like what Amy said, find your particular vibe that really resonates with you. Because once you find your path, it's going to be easier to grow yourself on these social platforms too.
It really,
Um, yeah, you know, once you find kind of what you vibe with, it's going to make that so much easier. And one thing that we mentioned, because I want to kind of come back to that too, is that bloggers oftentimes, some of these book bloggers have robust Instagram accounts. And at the end of the day, that's really what you want. You want somebody who's in the book world, who has you know, a robust social media. Um, so finding, you know, and we're going to talk about book bloggers in another show. I don't know if it's going to be, depending on when we run these, I don't know if it's going to be happen before or after the Bookstagrammers episode necessarily, but we are going to talk about book bloggers and pitching book bloggers. But you want to find people who have robust social media, because it's one thing to get into the Bookstagrammers funnel, but it's another thing to get into, like, if you get a book blogger who is, you know, reviews consistently on Amazon, who writes reviews on Goodreads, and then, you know, their Instagram accounts, which are also robust, become the icing on the cake, right? So you can find them. And, you know, the other thing though, too, is when I'm researching bloggers for a particular author, sometimes I'm also looking up, like, I'll follow the Bookstagrammers hashtag, and I'll go to see who's sharing what, and then go to their blog and say, oh, this is a really good fit for our author too. So you can find them through the books. You can find them through their hashtag and go to their blogs and kind of see what they're sharing as well, see what they're reviewing, and maybe tackle them on their blog. Because I would imagine if you're thinking of getting in touch with one of these folks, it's, I mean, I don't know about many of these Bookstagrammers, but I would imagine that they probably get a lot of direct messages. So you may be better off, if you are going to pitch them for your book, go target them through their blog. So find their email addresses through their blog, because you can usually find that under the review guidelines as well. Just to get, you know, to get in touch with them. And so what else, Amy? What else are we missing around Bookstagrammers?
Well, you know, as you were talking, as you kind of took it into the book blogger, you know, realm, it occurred to me that that was a great transition for that, because it makes sense that something that sounds new and inexpensive, like the Bookstagram tour, it really kind of piques people's interest for something new to try. And
Sure.
so and so
Yeah.
now all of a sudden people are thinking like, Bookstagrammers, what is this? I need to do this, the Bookstagrammer thing. And you're bringing the blogger aspect into this is really so smart, because it gets back into like, what is your goal? So maybe
Yeah.
your goal isn't to necessarily track down all these Bookstagrammers. Like, yeah, find a few. But if your goal is to really get recommendations for your book through thought leaders that are, reaching readers, maybe the Bookstagrammer thing shouldn't be your tunnel vision focus. At the end of the day, if you're looking for these recommendations by thought leaders, go to the book bloggers as well. It's just so great that something like a Bookstagrammer tour, I do, for what it's worth, love the fact that it probably does pique a lot of authors' interest. And now they are kind of inundating themselves trying to learn about this whole Instagram phenomenon of, thought leaders and things like that. And I really appreciate that it kind of highlights something new that they can try. But, maybe the path there isn't what you expected, if that makes sense.
Well, and that really does make sense. And I think the other piece of this too is that if one of the things that you and I struggled with the Bookstagrammers is because there was no clear path, right? It seemed very mysterious. And one of the things that I find is that if there is no clear path to something when it comes to marketing, there's probably a reason why, right? So, Amazon seems mysterious, getting on television seems mysterious, and on and on and on. But there's usually a pathway to accessing it, right? And part of the reason why Bookstagrammers seemed so weirdly mysterious is because, yeah, I think the networking, I think all of that stuff is great. I think sharing their posts, commenting on their posts, all of that is always, I always recommend that. But it's not necessarily like the Bookstagrammers are, they're people with these great, robust, beautiful accounts. But the other side of that is that most of them are book bloggers. Those that aren't are just people who love books, and that may or may not benefit you in some way. Does that make sense? Because I realize I'm
No, 100%. I think this was really great, because I bet this is not an isolated instance where Bookstagram tour is going to come up, and we'll probably be seeing it more and more. And I think this is an important topic to talk about. So authors that listen know that, signing up for this tour isn't going to be your one and done fix to start getting recommendations on Instagram. But now we've kind of taken it apart and deconstructed it a little bit. So hopefully everybody listening to this has some tips now for how to get more engaged and involved on Instagram in ways that will start leading to you actually potentially getting some shares and some coverage on some of these bigger Instagram accounts that really have, some say in the book world.
Yeah, exactly. Because I do like the idea. I mean, Instagram is one of my favorite sites, for all of the reasons that you mentioned, and because it is so, it's fun, it's creative, it's so visual. It's really, and I think that it can benefit most of the authors that we've worked with, that have done well on Instagram, have done well because they've spent the time connecting with people that are exactly right to their particular market. Because the other piece that we didn't mention of Bookstagrammers in general, and I don't want to overgeneralize the hashtag, but many of them are fiction readers, right? So a lot of the books that they're recommending are fiction. So not that, if you're nonfiction that you can't get, certainly get in there. But like I said, target the bloggers first and take a look and see, because many of them are going to have really robust accounts that are pulling in a lot of engagement from readers who will actually be interested in your book.
Yes, exactly.
So I want to thank you so much for tuning in. This was really, really fun. I'm glad that we had a chance to break down the Bookstagrammer Instagram. It's a kind of a tongue twister topic. On the next show, like I said, it might be the one previous to this, but we are going to break down book blogger tours, book tours, and whether or not they actually make money, because I think that's a really good question. As ever, I want to remind you, if you're listening, we love listener feedback. There's always a way to contact us in the show notes. So we love listener feedback. We love reviews. So please, please, please review the book, review the podcast on the book. Listen to me. You can review the book too, but review the podcast on iTunes. We love to hear what you thought of the show or what shows your favorite. If you have show ideas, by all means, send them our way. Thank you so much. This is Penny Sansbury and Amy Cornell, and we're so pleased to have you join us on the show. Bye-bye.